The first rays of Hawaiian sunrise painted Oahu's mountains in shades of gold, and crimson as Seaman First Class James Ward stepped onto the deck of the USS Arizona. It was Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, and the Pacific Fleet lay anchored peacefully in Pearl Harbor like sleeping giants on a mirror-calm sea. Ward inhaled the tropical air, still carrying the faint scent of plumeria from the shore, and checked his watch. 6:45. In less than 2 hours, this paradise would become a hell that would echo through history. 300 miles north of Oahu, aboard the Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi, Commander Mitsuo Fukuda adjusted his flight goggles and surveyed the deck, bustling with final preparations. 183 aircraft Nakajima K torpedo bombers, Aichi Val dive bombers, and Mitsubishi Zero fighters sat ready for launch in the pre-dawn darkness. Fukuda, chosen to lead the first wave of what the Japanese called Operation Hawaii, felt the weight of destiny on his shoulders. Emperor Hirohito's navy had sailed 6,000 miles in absolute secrecy for this moment. The plan was audacious in its scope and devastating in its intent. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had studied American naval capabilities with the precision of a chess master. He knew that crippling the Pacific Fleet would give Japan the breathing room needed to establish its greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. According to intelligence reports referenced in Walter Lord's comprehensive account Day of Infamy, the Americans maintained a peacetime routine even as tensions escalated across the Pacific. Back in Pearl Harbor, the battleships rested in their berths along Ford Island like sitting ducks. The USS Oklahoma, USS West Virginia, USS California, USS Arizona, USS Nevada, USS Pennsylvania, USS Maryland, and USS Tennessee represented the backbone of American naval power in the Pacific. Their crews, numbering in the thousands, were enjoying the lazy Sunday morning routine that had become standard in the paradise posting of Hawaii. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey sat in the Ford Island Command Center, reviewing routine communications traffic. Radio intercepts had been picking up increased Japanese naval activity, but nothing seemed immediately threatening. The War Department had issued warnings about potential sabotage, but a coordinated aerial assault seemed impossible given the vast distances involved. At exactly 600 hours, the first wave of Japanese aircraft lifted off from their carriers. Fukuda's bomber climbed into the brightening sky, followed by his deadly formation. The engine's roar echoed across the empty Pacific as 183 aircraft formed up and turned south toward their target. Each pilot carried detailed maps of Pearl Harbor, studied and memorized during weeks of intensive preparation. The second wave, consisting of 170 additional aircraft, under Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki, would follow 1 hour later. This coordinated assault represented months of meticulous planning, involving detailed reconnaissance photographs and intelligence gathered by Japanese spies. Operating throughout Hawaii. As the sun climbed higher over Oahu, civilian life continued its peaceful Sunday rhythm. Families prepared for church services. Children played in yards fragrant with hibiscus, and military personnel looked forward to a day of rest. The USS Arizona's band was scheduled to perform at a ceremony later that morning, their instruments polished and ready. Nobody could have imagined that within 2 hours, over 2,400 Americans would be dead, the Pacific Fleet would lie in ruins, and the United States would be thrust into the deadliest conflict in human history. At 700 hours, radar operators Private Joseph Lockard and Private George Elliott detected an unusually large formation of aircraft approaching Oahu from the north. The oscilloscope screen at the Apana Point radar station showed more than 50 contacts, but their report to the information center was dismissed as either a malfunction or the expected arrival of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses from California. Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, the duty officer who received the call, made a decision that would haunt him forever. Don't worry about it. Those 4 words sealed the fate of thousands of sailors who might have had precious minutes to prepare for battle. Commander Fukuda's formation flew south through the crystal-clear Hawaiian morning, maintaining radio silence as they approached their target. At 7:40, he spotted the distinctive landmarks of Oahu's north shore. Diamond Head Crater rose majestically from the southeastern coast, while Pearl Harbor spread out like a detailed model below them. The American fleet lay exactly where intelligence reports had promised: concentrated, unprepared, and vulnerable. Tora, Tora, Tora. Fukuda radioed back to the strike force. Using the code word meaning tiger to signal complete surprise had been achieved, the message was immediately relayed to Admiral Chuichi Nagumo aboard Akagi, then transmitted across the Pacific to Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo. The first bombs fell at 7:55 on Ford Island's Naval Air Station. Zero fighters swept down like metal hawks, their machine guns chattering as they strafed rows of parked aircraft. Explosions erupted across the airfield as fuel tanks ignited, sending columns of black smoke spiraling into the morning sky. Aboard the USS Arizona, Seaman Ward was serving breakfast when the first explosions rocked the harbor. Initially dismissed as a drill gone wrong, the reality became unmistakable when machine gun bullets began pinging off the battleship's superstructure. General quarters alarms began wailing across the fleet as thousands of sailors raced to battle stations they had never expected to man. In anger, the Japanese attack unfolded. With clockwork precision, Cape torpedo bombers, modified to operate in Pearl Harbor's 40-foot depths, swept in low over the water. Their torpedoes, equipped with wooden fins specifically designed for shallow water attacks, ran straight and true toward Battleship Row. According to declassified Navy reports cited in Gordon Prange's At Dawn We Slept, the first torpedo struck USS Oklahoma at 7:56, followed immediately by hits on USS West Virginia. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg aboard USS Arizona tried desperately to get his ship underway, but the massive battleship needed precious time to build steam. Pressure. Around them, the harbor erupted in a maelstrom of explosions, smoke, and the screams of wounded men. Anti-aircraft guns began returning fire, filling the sky with black puffs of flak, but the Japanese pilots pressed their attacks with suicidal determination. USS Oklahoma began listing heavily to port as multiple torpedoes tore gaping holes in her hull. Sailors trapped below decks pounded frantically on bulkheads as seawater rushed through the ship. 429 men would die aboard Oklahoma, many of them drowning in compartments that became steel coffins. The harbor's surface became a chaos of burning oil, debris, and men struggling in the water. Motor launches and small boats began rescue operations even as the attack continued overhead. Hospital Corpsman First Class John Harley Bradley pulled survivor after survivor from the oil-slicked water. His white uniform soon stained black with fuel and red with blood at 800 hours. The first wave of Japanese attackers began their withdrawal, leaving behind a scene of unprecedented destruction. But Commander Fukuda knew this was only the beginning. The second wave was already approaching from the north, carrying even more devastating ordnance designed to finish what the first attack had started. As smoke billowed thousands of feet into the Hawaiian sky, our ADIO operators began transmitting the message that would electrify America: air raid Pearl Harbor. This is not drill. At 8:06, as the second wave of Japanese attackers approached Pearl Harbor, high-altitude bomber pilot First Class Noboru Kanai released his modified 16-inch armor-piercing bomb. From 10,000 feet above USS Arizona, the massive projectile, converted from a battleship's main gun shell, plummeted through the morning air with deadly accuracy. Captain Van Valkenburg stood on Arizona's bridge, coordinating damage control efforts as his crew fought to save their ship. The battleship had already suffered several hits, with fires raging on her forward decks. Medical personnel moved wounded sailors to safer areas, while damage control parties struggled to contain flooding. From near-miss explosions, the converted armor-piercing bomb penetrated Arizona's forward magazines with catastrophic results. At 8:06 and 10 seconds, the battleship simply vanished in a column of fire and smoke that rose over 1,000 feet into the Hawaiian sky. The explosion was visible from Honolulu, 20 miles away, and the shockwave shattered windows across Pearl Harbor. Seaman Ward, who had been helping carry wounded to the stern, disappeared in the fireball along with 1,176 of his shipmates. The explosion lifted Arizona's forward turrets completely off their barbets and broke the ship's back, settling her permanently on the harbor bottom. Only 335 men survived from her crew of over 1,500 photographers. Mate Harold Fawcett, stationed on nearby Ford Island, captured the iconic image of Arizona's destruction. That would become one of the war's most recognizable photographs. According to Navy historical records referenced in Michael Gannon's Pearl Harbor Betrayed, the explosion registered on seismographs in Honolulu as a magnitude 3 earthquake. USS Oklahoma, struck by multiple torpedoes, had already capsized completely, trapping hundreds of sailors in air pockets within her overturned hull. For the next 36 hours, rescue crews would work frantically to cut through her hull. Following the sound of tapping from inside, 32 men were eventually rescued, but over 400 perished in the ship's steel tomb. The second wave of Japanese attackers, led by Lieutenant Commander Shimazaki, found Pearl Harbor already wreathed in smoke and flame. Their primary targets, the aircraft carriers, were absent from the harbor, having departed on routine missions days earlier. This absence would prove crucial to America's eventual victory in the Pacific, though the attackers couldn't know it at the time. USS Pennsylvania, flagship of the Pacific Fleet, sat in dry dock number 1 undergoing routine maintenance. Despite being partially protected by the dock's concrete walls, she suffered bomb damage that killed several crew members. The destroyers USS Cassin and USS Downs, sharing the dry dock, were completely destroyed when their magazines detonated. Across the harbor at Hickam Field, Japanese fighters strafed the airfield with devastating effect. Colonel William Farthing watched helplessly as his carefully maintained Boeing B-17 and B-18 bombers erupted in flames. The few American aircraft that managed to get airborne fought desperately against overwhelming odds. Second Lieutenant George Welch and Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor, having raced from Wheeler Field to Haliwa, managed to take off in Curtiss P-40 Warhawks and engage the attackers. Flying through clouds of friendly anti-aircraft fire, they shot down several Japanese aircraft in aerial combat that would inspire countless war movies. USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, presented both hope and danger as she steamed toward the harbor entrance. Japanese pilots concentrated their attacks on the moving target, hoping to sink her in the channel and block the harbor permanently. Recognizing this danger, Nevada's crew deliberately grounded their ship near Hospital Point rather than risk closing Pearl Harbor to future operations. By 9:45, the last Japanese aircraft had departed northward, leaving behind a scene of unprecedented destruction. The Pacific Fleet's battle line lay in ruins, Arizona destroyed, Oklahoma capsized, West Virginia and California sunk at their moorings, Nevada grounded, Maryland, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania damaged but salvageable. The attack had lasted less than 2 hours, but its impact would resonate through history. As rescue operations began and damage assessment teams surveyed the carnage, one fact became crystal clear: America was now at war, and there would be no going back to the peaceful Sunday morning that had begun just hours earlier. Amid the chaos and destruction of Pearl Harbor, individual acts of heroism shone like beacons in the darkness. As Japanese aircraft continued their devastating attacks, American servicemen responded with courage that would define their generation's character. Chief Boatswain's Mate Joseph George aboard USS Oklahoma refused to abandon his post even as the battleship capsized. He remained at his battle station, helping shipmates escape through portholes as seawater flooded the compartments. George was last seen pushing another sailor to safety before the ship rolled completely over, trapping him inside. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his sacrifice. On Ford Island, Chief Petty Officer John Finn manned a 50 caliber machine gun in the open. Despite being wounded multiple times by strafing Japanese fighters, blood streaming from his arm and leg wounds, Finn continued firing at attacking aircraft until ordered to seek medical attention. His sustained defensive fire helped protect critical fuel storage facilities from destruction. At Hickam Field, Technical Sergeant William Rasmussen organized firefighting efforts even as Japanese bullets shattered the ground around him. When a Zero fighter strafed the fire truck he was operating, Rasmussen ducked for cover, then immediately returned to fighting the blazes consuming America's most advanced bombers. According to eyewitness accounts documented in Donald Stratton's All the Gallant Men, such dedication under fire was repeated hundreds of times across the harbor. Aboard USS West Virginia, Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller found himself thrust into combat despite having no formal weapons training. African-American sailors were typically assigned to food service roles due to Navy segregation policies, but when his battle station was destroyed, Miller helped move wounded sailors to safety, then manned an unmanned anti-aircraft gun. Despite never having fired such a weapon, he shot down at least one Japanese aircraft and possibly two before running out of ammunition. USS Nevada's attempt to escape the harbor became an epic of seamanship and courage, with her regular commanding officer ashore. Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas assumed command and ordered the ship to get underway. Despite multiple bomb hits and fires raging throughout the ship, Nevada's crew maintained steam pressure and steered toward the harbor entrance, realizing that Nevada might sink in the channel and permanently block Pearl Harbor. Senior officers signaled her to run aground. Chief Quartermaster Robert Sudbury deliberately beached the battleship near Hospital Point, saving both his ship and the harbor itself. This decision would prove crucial for America's eventual Pacific offensive. At the submarine base, Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua took charge of damage control efforts aboard USS Arizona, even after her devastating magazine explosion. Working in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, Fuqua organized rescue parties and supervised the evacuation of wounded sailors. His leadership saved dozens of lives and earned him the Medal of Honor. The hospital at Pearl Harbor became a scene of organized chaos as medical personnel worked to save hundreds of wounded sailors. Navy nurse Ruth Erickson worked for hours without rest, treating burns, shrapnel wounds, and trauma injuries with supplies that quickly ran short. The hospital's staff performed miracles of medical care under impossible conditions. Civilian workers also displayed remarkable heroism during the attack. Yard worker Joe George risked his life repeatedly to rescue sailors from burning ships. Using a small motor launch, he pulled survivor after survivor from oil-covered water while Japanese aircraft continued strafing the harbor. His small boat became a lifeline for dozens of men who would otherwise have drowned. At Wheeler Field, ground crews worked frantically to get undamaged aircraft airborne. Despite continued strafing attacks, Sergeant Lowell Klatt and his mechanics serviced fighter planes under fire, enabling the few successful American aerial counterattacks of the day. Their courage helped prove that American fighting spirit remained unbroken despite the surprise attack. Radio operator Kyle Boyer continued transmitting messages throughout the attack, keeping communication lines open between Pearl Harbor and the mainland. His steady voice provided crucial coordination for defense efforts and damage assessment. Boyer's transmissions would provide some of the first detailed accounts of the attack to reach Washington. These individual acts of heroism, multiplied across hundreds of similar stories, demonstrated that while the Japanese had achieved tactical surprise, they had awakened something far more dangerous: American determination. The courage displayed at Pearl Harbor would become the foundation for victory in the Pacific War that lay ahead. As the last Japanese aircraft disappeared over the northern horizon, Pearl Harbor resembled a scene from Dante's Inferno. Black smoke rose thousands of feet into the Hawaiian sky while oil fires burned on the water's surface. The acrid smell of curdite, burning fuel, at worst filled the tropical air as rescue operations began in earnest. Admiral Husband Kimmel, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, arrived at his headquarters to find his naval empire in ruins. The battleships he had counted on to project American power across the Pacific lay destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. Arizona's broken hull rested on the harbor bottom, her main mast protruding above the surface like a tombstone. Oklahoma had capsized completely, her hull resembling a beached whale. The human cost became apparent as casualty reports streamed in throughout the day. 2,403 Americans had died in less than 2 hours of combat, with another 1,178 wounded. The Navy suffered the heaviest losses, 2,008 dead and 710 wounded. The Army lost 218 men with 364 wounded. USS Arizona alone accounted for nearly half the total fatalities, with 1,177 sailors and Marines killed in the magazine explosion. Many victims were never recovered from the ship's twisted wreckage, remaining entombed in what would become America's most sacred war memorial. Damage assessment teams worked through the afternoon cataloging the destruction. 18 warships had been sunk or damaged, including 8 battleships, the backbone of American naval power in the Pacific. 188 aircraft were destroyed on the ground, with another 159 damaged. Crucial facilities like fuel storage tanks, dry docks, and repair shops had suffered significant damage. However, the Japanese attack had missed several critical targets that would prove decisive in the coming war. The Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga were absent from Pearl Harbor on various missions. These ships would form the nucleus of America's comeback in the Pacific theater. The massive fuel storage tanks at Pearl Harbor remained largely intact, containing over 4 million barrels of oil essential for fleet operations. Admiral Yamamoto later admitted that destroying these tanks would have crippled American naval operations for months. The submarine base also escaped serious damage. allowing America's undersea fleet to begin immediate offensive operations against Japanese shipping. According to intelligence reports later declassified and referenced in Edwin Hoyt's Pearl Harbor attack, Japanese losses were remarkably light. 29 aircraft shot down and 5 midget submarines destroyed. Only 55 Japanese servicemen died in the attack, a testament to their thorough preparation and tactical surprise. Word of the attack reached Washington at approximately 1:20 in the afternoon Eastern Time. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was having lunch in the White House when Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox telephoned with the devastating news. Roosevelt's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by grim determination to respond decisively. The president immediately convened his war cabinet to assess the situation and prepare for what everyone knew would be a declaration of war. Secretary of State Cordell Hull was meeting with Japanese representatives Saburo Kurusu and Kichisaburo Nomura when news arrived, leading to one of diplomacy's most tense confrontations. Congress received Roosevelt's request for a declaration of war against Japan the following day. In one of history's most memorable speeches, the president described December 7, 1941, as a date which will live in infamy. The House of Representatives voted for 118 to 1 for war, with only Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin dissenting. Back in Pearl Harbor, rescue operations continued through the night. Cutting torches worked to free sailors trapped in overturned ships, while divers searched submerged compartments for survivors. The oil-covered harbor surface flickered with flames that would burn for days, creating an apocalyptic scene that seared itself into American memory. By midnight, the immediate crisis had stabilized, but the implications were only beginning to unfold. America faced a two-ocean war against enemies who had struck the first blow. With devastating effectiveness, the road to victory would be long, costly, and uncertain. But the determination born in Pearl Harbor's flames would ultimately prove unstoppable. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, the United States transformed from a reluctant participant in world affairs to the arsenal of democracy with stunning speed. The attack that Admiral Yamamoto hoped would cripple American resolve instead awakened a sleeping giant that would ultimately reshape the global balance of power. The salvage operations at Pearl Harbor became a testament to American industrial ingenuity and determination. Rear Admiral William Leahy led efforts to refloat and repair the damaged fleet, employing innovative techniques that would set new standards for naval engineering. USS California, Nevada, and West Virginia were raised, rebuilt, and returned to service with improved armor and armament. Even USS Oklahoma, considered a total loss after capsizing, was eventually righted and raised in one of the war's most remarkable salvage operations, though the damage for combat service. Her successful recovery demonstrated American technological capabilities to friend and foe alike. The operation required 21 months and innovative righting techniques never before attempted on such a massive scale. The human stories of survival continued to emerge as rescue operations concluded. Aboard the capsized Oklahoma, 32 sailors were cut free from air pockets where they had survived for up to 36 hours. Their rescues provided hope amid the tragedy and demonstrated the unwavering commitment to saving every possible life. Seaman Douglas Hine was pulled alive from Oklahoma's hull after 32 hours of imprisonment in a flooding compartment. His survival story, along with those of other rescued sailors, would inspire countless Americans and reinforce the determination to achieve victory, regardless of cost. The investigation into Pearl Harbor security failures began immediately. Led by Supreme Court Justice Owen Roberts, the Roberts Commission would be followed by multiple congressional inquiries, each seeking to understand how such a devastating surprise attack had been possible. Despite numerous warning signs, Admiral Kimmel and General Walter Short, Army commander in Hawaii, became scapegoats for the disaster. Both were relieved of command and reduced in rank, though later investigations would reveal that intelligence failures in Washington bore significant responsibility for the lack of adequate warning. Meanwhile, the Japanese celebration of their tactical victory proved short-lived. As strategic realities became apparent, Admiral Yamamoto privately expressed concern that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. His prediction would prove prophetic as American industrial production shifted to a wartime footing. The attack's psychological impact on American society was immediate and profound. Isolationist sentiment evaporated overnight as previously divided Americans united behind the war effort. Factories began converting to military production, while millions of young men lined up at recruiting stations to enlist in the armed forces. Hollywood responded quickly, producing films that portrayed Pearl Harbor as a call to action rather than a defeat. Movies like Wake Island and They Were Expendable reinforced themes of sacrifice and determination that would sustain American morale through 4 years of global warfare. According to production statistics referenced in Alan Milward's War, Economy and Society, American manufacturing output doubled between 1941 and 1945. This industrial mobilization dwarfed anything previously attempted in human history and provided the material foundation for Allied victory. The technological innovation sparked by Pearl Harbor's lessons revolutionized naval warfare. Radar systems were improved and proliferated throughout the fleet, while aircraft carrier tactics evolved to emphasize air power over traditional battleship engagements. The very battleships that suffered so heavily at Pearl Harbor would soon be relegated to secondary roles. Intelligence operations received massive investment and reorganization. Following Pearl Harbor's intelligence failures, the breaking of Japanese naval codes would provide crucial advantages in upcoming battles, while improved coordination between military and civilian intelligence agencies enhanced strategic planning capabilities. By the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, the United States had assembled the largest military force in its history. 12 million Americans served in uniform, supported by a home front that had completely transformed its economic and social structures. To support the war effort, the ships raised from Pearl Harbor's mud would eventually participate in the final victory over Japan, sailing into Tokyo Bay for the surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri. Their resurrection symbolized America's remarkable recovery from the disaster that had seemed so overwhelming on that December morning. On September 2, 1945, as General Douglas MacArthur accepted Japan's surrender aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the circle that began at Pearl Harbor was finally complete. The battleship hosting this historic ceremony had been commissioned after the attack, built with lessons learned from that day of infamy and crewed by sailors who had not forgotten the sacrifice of their predecessors. The strategic consequences of Pearl Harbor ultimately favored the United States. Despite the initial tactical success achieved by Japan, Admiral Yamamoto's gamble had been predicated on American unwillingness to sustain a prolonged Pacific War. Instead, the attack provided the emotional catalyst that transformed America into an unstoppable military juggernaut. The technological revolution sparked by Pearl Harbor's lessons reshaped naval warfare permanently. Aircraft carriers, which had been absent from the harbor on December 7th, became the new capital ships of naval combat. The Battle of Midway, fought just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, demonstrated decisively that air power had supplanted the big guns of battleships as the primary instrument of naval supremacy. Radar technology, primitive at the time of the attack, evolved rapidly into sophisticated detection and fire control systems that gave American forces crucial advantages. In subsequent battles, the radar operators who had detected the incoming Japanese formation but were ignored would be vindicated as electronic warfare became central to modern combat. Intelligence operations, reorganized after Pearl Harbor's intelligence failures, achieved remarkable successes against Japan. The breaking of Japanese naval codes enabled Admiral Chester Nimitz to position his outnumbered fleet for victory at Midway, while improved coordination between intelligence agencies provided strategic advantages throughout the Pacific theater. The human cost of Pearl Harbor was ultimately dwarfed by the casualties that followed, but the symbolic importance of those first American deaths in World War II remained profound. According to Department of Defense statistics referenced in Thomas Allen's Remember Pearl Harbor, over 400,000 Americans would die in the war that began with the Pearl Harbor attack. USS Arizona became America's most sacred war memorial, her hull remaining on the harbor bottom as an eternal tomb for the 1,107 sailors and Marines who died in her magazine explosion. The memorial built above her wreckage receives over 2 million visitors annually, ensuring that each new generation remembers the sacrifice made on December 7, 1941. The social changes triggered by Pearl Harbor transformed American society permanently. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, African Americans began breaking down segregation barriers in the military, and the United States emerged from isolationism to become a global superpower committed to international engagement. The attack's anniversary became a national day of remembrance, with Remember Pearl Harbor serving as both a battle cry and a solemn pledge to honor those who died. Veterans of the attack became living links to that pivotal moment, their first-hand accounts preserving the memory of America's entry into its greatest trial. Modern Pearl Harbor serves as both an active naval base and a historical shrine. The harbor that once lay in ruins now hosts advanced warships equipped with weapon systems that would have seemed like science fiction to the sailors of 1941. Yet the lessons of preparedness, vigilance, and sacrifice remain as relevant today as they were 8 decades ago. The strategic warning provided by Pearl Harbor influenced American defense planning throughout the Cold War and beyond. The possibility of surprise attack, so dramatically demonstrated on December 7th, shaped military doctrine, intelligence priorities, and diplomatic strategies for generations of American leaders. Admiral Yamamoto's prediction that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant proved accurate beyond his worst fears. The industrial colossus that arose from Pearl Harbor's ashes produced over 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and hundreds of warships. This productive capacity, mobilized by the determination born in Pearl Harbor's flames, proved unstoppable. As the sun sets over Pearl Harbor today, the USS Arizona Memorial stands as an eternal reminder that freedom requires constant vigilance and ultimate sacrifice. The names of the 1,177 sailors and Marines who died aboard Arizona are engraved in marble, ensuring their sacrifice will never be forgotten. The attack that began at 7:55 on December 7th, 1941, lasted less than 2 hours but changed the course of human history. From the flames and fury of that Sunday morning emerged the United States committed to defending democracy worldwide, a commitment sealed with the blood of heroes who answered their nation's call in its darkest hour.